What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Blue River Bow Hunting Podcast, episode 93. I got a stranger over here, I feel like, co-hosting with me tonight. Dylan's a little under the weather. I think he's got the old vid down there in Tennessee. So I already had this show lined up with Cody. So Adam, I texted Adam, and he was more than welcome to hop on as long as I bought a case of beer today to get him in here. But we got Cody from Public Land Whitetails on tonight with us. What's going on, man?
Hey, thanks for having me. I always love coming on new podcasts, and me and you got to talking, and I was like, man, this would be a great one to be on. So,
Absolutely, absolutely. I was showing him some of your videos before we came down here in the man cave and recording, and I was like, "This is kind of similar how your stuff with Cesar and what I did last year on video. The videos are kind of similar, and we got to talking about it, and a lot of the same circumstances with the hunt, which was kind of wild, and we were texting back and forth. But for somebody that doesn't know you, Cody, introduce yourself a little bit.
yeah, so I'm Cody Huhn. I originally hailed from Michigan, as I like to say, as all some of the greats do in bow hunting, especially for public land. But no, originally from Michigan, and kind of cut my teeth out there. That was a really tough state, especially growing up, to just hunt in general, let alone even to try anything on public land. So I really had to learn pretty quick if I wanted to shoot anything of any size. And after some years of hunting there and being pretty successful killing that age class, which is obviously was a much younger age class back when I lived there some years back, I decided while I was so young, I decided I was going to come out to the Midwest and really dedicate myself to whitetails. It kind of started when I took an internship with Midwest Whitetail, and on public land the first year I killed my biggest buck still to this day, which is the buck over my shoulder here. It's a 100 and gross 168. Uh, and yeah, public land. I was like, man, couldn't beat that. And I was like, well, we're moving to the Midwest, and now I've been out here in Iowa ever since, and I have a couple booners that I've killed, and just been doing awesome. As you can see on the show, I've been chasing some just absolute giant bucks. Just huge bucks. Even been on the track of and in the ballpark of some world class whitetails as well. So that's kind of the rundown, awesome. And kind of my background. And I just dedicate myself completely, my whole lifestyle, to public land hunting, whitetail hunting. I've do my best to turn this into my actual career and work. Although it's, the cash isn't always there. I make do because it's just my passion, and just want to bring that to everybody, bring the show to everybody, and show everybody, how much fun you can have on public land. And I've been on some podcasts recently where I've talked about some like management, even with public land. I want to kind of bring that to the forefront as well with guys, and just elevate everybody, raise everybody, drop knowledge, and just get everybody involved.
Absolutely. I didn't have it written down because I've totally spaced it. Sometimes when I put these notes together, I don't really have everything. My wheels aren't spinning like the way they need to be. Midwest Whitetail, your internship with them. Talk about that, how you got into that and how it all played out.
Yeah, can't believe I got it. Still don't know why they picked me. Really had very little experience in general with video editing or videography, photography, and I had just started my YouTube channel at that point in time, which back then it was called Mid Michigan Whitetails. What a different name! Wow, but they were a big inspiration at the time, and I had lived in Mid Michigan, and that was where I was trying to start my own little show, do my own little thing. I was shooting some decent bucks, especially for how young I was back then. This is over 10 years ago at this point. I was shooting some pretty solid bucks out of Michigan, out of central Michigan, of that like 3-year-old range class, which for the area was a pretty big deal. Pope and young bucks, whatnot. And that's where I started my show. And I was about one full season into my show, where I just started YouTube, just started doing everything, and they put out their feelers for new interns. I applied, and I just slowly made it through the process. And I don't know if it was my passion and willingness to learn, or exactly what was going on with that, but somehow I got made it all the way to the end, and I was chosen as one of the guys. Pretty selective group of just a handful of guys, and I packed my whole life up and I moved out there. I moved out here to Iowa, and
seen some of the best hunting lanes
ever
I've
since
ever
then,
seen.
What's that?
I said, and probably seen some of the best hunting land you've ever seen during that.
Yeah, there's we can get into that later, but Iowa, in regards to public land, when you're talking specifically public, I will argue with people. It's not as good as what people think it is. We can dabble into that a little bit later. But when it comes to sections, like whole counties, even specifically talking private land, it's probably the best place to hunt whitetails in the world. There's just whole neighborhoods where people with a lot of money have bought up entire, 3,000-4,000 acre sections, and then their neighbor has 3,000-4,000 acres, and they butt them all together, and nobody wants to shoot anything that's, they don't even crawl out of bed if it's not a 1.7. I know you down in some of the bars you're drinking in some of the small towns, you got some of the old farmers and some of the big names. You'll run into some of the really big names in the hunting industry out here, and you'll talk to them, and they'll be swapping stories, and guys are like, well, the big one's not in the area, or he didn't show up on cam, and so what's the big one? Well, he's pushing 200, and then, well, you won't go after the 3 180s you guys have? No. We'll go after this one. Well, cool. I'll try to buy that 20 acres next to you someday.
Right.
But,
with that being said, you said you started it was Mid-Michigan Whitetails. Talk about Public Land Whitetails, what it's evolved into being, and kind of your goals and everything going forward as that channel as a whole.
Yeah, so it started as Mid-Michigan Whitetails, just a passion project. Once I moved out here to the Midwest, I needed a name change, and obviously I had also filmed that year because they wanted the interns to film. So my biggest buck to date was on film. That's on Midwest Whitetail. It's in an episode where Mike kills a buck in late season as well. So once that happened, I was like, well, I got this footage now, and I got my old footage, and I decided to change the name, which the public land thing, I had hunted public land in Michigan, but it was just so terrible. It gave me a bad taste in my mouth, and I didn't get that bug. Coming out here to the Midwest and seeing, not even in Iowa, but just being in the Midwest, seeing what the public land and its potential was, truly gave me that itch to really just focus public land. Now I like to travel the country, and I hunt all public land everywhere. I still try to stay to some of the better states for sure. But I love the adventure of it. I've grown with the channel, and really for me now, it's just an adventure. I love almost being able to sit in a new stand every single day if that's what I wanted to do. Being able to just, shed hunt, explore, go into new areas, and you get on maps and you're like, man, you get all excited. That looks like it could be awesome, or this could be cool, or check that, maybe that's a funnel, and you get out there and you actually get to lay eyes on it, and it's just like a whole process. It's an entire day. Every day of the week I can go out there, and even in the summer, if you really want to get into it, you can still get out there. You can still scout, check new areas out. Even in the summer, I stick more to like hiking trails or things like that, but I still dabble in going into new areas, checking out stuff. But it eats me up at this point. It's 365 days a year, postseason scouting, hunting. It's just that chase, and private land is cool, and I still dabble in it here and there and do a little bit when I can, but I really enjoy the ability to just travel and to hunt something new every day. And you just never know. Sometimes if you're not super invested in the area, even if it's unlikely, you set up and you're sitting there and you're like, what's going to come out? And you don't know what's going to come out, and anything could come out. I mean, we see episodes all the time where guys go in new areas on public and they kill a giant, and that almost the unknown is what's fun for me. A lot of times I get into an area and I hunt a lot of it. I just hunt the crap out of it. And I know almost every buck in that area. And even though there's giants in there, except for the area with Cesar, just because at this point he's irking me. Me and him have a fight going on. But besides for him specifically, yeah, he is at this point. That story's getting crazy. But just in general, like I can figure an area out and I'll be like, yeah, there's great bucks there, but I'll a lot of times choose to just go sit somewhere new. And 90% of the time that somewhere new is a terrible spot. You know, it's not, it's over 100. There's too many guys in there. Maybe there's not any kind of buck that I want to chase in there. Access is terrible, but just the adventure of doing it. And I really enjoy that. That's what it's all about for me. And that's kind of what I want to show and bring to the channel with people. Plus, I just want people to see my passion. That's something that nobody's ever can take away from me. And I think I show that, and I show my passion, how much I truly love to be out there and how much I love hunting public, and trying to be knowledgeable and show guys that, even though I dedicate a lot more time than a lot of other people, that the average guy just with with passion can really get out there and be really successful and just have a good year and have a good hunt. And that's kind of what I aim to do.
Yeah. So Cody, you said like hunting the unknown. I've talked about it.
Yeah.
I run a ton of cell cams, and it almost sometimes it's like I talked to Brett, like almost don't want to put cameras out because you go back to setting, you don't know what'll come by. And I don't know. I've talked about not putting cameras out because I remember as a kid I didn't know what was in the woods because we didn't have cameras, we didn't have cell cams, so you didn't know what would come by. So it just makes it more exciting when you hunt the unknown.
Yeah. I'm big on cell cams though. I will say,
Me too.
I love them. It's a love-hate relationship. I really do love them. Yeah. It's a tool. I love them. I think they're useful for. I actually think they get a lot of bucks passed, especially on public land, because of 3-4 guys in an area can all be like, okay, there's a 160 in here, and if they're all chasing that buck, maybe they'll let that smaller 3-year-old go.
Absolutely.
Now it's not everywhere, but I think having more information, which is all a cell camera does, keeps guys more informed, and having better informed hunters is just going to elevate the industry rather than trying to take that away from people. I think if you take it away, then everybody's living off of opinions and ideas, and it's going to be their own, and that's going to vary. Maybe some areas are going to be great where there's a lot of guys that are just hardcore. I know there's big deer in here. I got the sign. I'm going to wait for that buck. And I think there's other areas where a lot of people who maybe they don't hunt all the time, they only have some weekends, maybe they're not as hardcore, they're going to come in and just shoot the first buck that comes by, and that's going to hurt the age class of that area. So,
but it also, you don't run the deer out because you wait. You sit and wait back for a daylight picture, So there's a lot of plus to them for sure. What I was surprised about last year, we went to hunt Missouri, and Missouri does not let you use trail cams on state property. And that surprised the crap out of me when I read that, but there's a reason for it. I don't know what it is, but yeah, they didn't allow them on state property in Missouri.
Didn't Iowa change a law this year for that?
So they were trying to, but everybody got into a really big uproar. I started talking with some of the bigger public land Iowa guys as well, and between them and them talking to some of the industry guys, everybody pretty much dogpiled the Iowa DNR, and that it got it got shelved. Let me rephrase that. Not reverted. It got shelved for at least the year pretty quickly. Their goal was they had good intentions. They were trying to fix some loopholes that were in some other laws, which those didn't get shelved. But the trail camera thing kind of came on the back end of another, I guess you could say, loophole on another law, and it was just nobody could put anything out overnight. The only thing you could have would be a tree stand.
So what's the reasoning behind it? Have you heard?
So it was they weren't specifically targeting cameras. What they were targeting was these loophole laws essentially. And for instance, one of them was that a non-resident could basically not have a tag. They could party hunt with like a farmer who has a tag. And if they hunted with them, they could shoot. They could sit in a blind, they could shoot a buck, and then the farmer could tag it with the party hunting tag. and they could get the deer. So there's people where they were coming every single year and killing a buck. And even outfitters were getting party tags and selling these tags, and guys were coming every single year. And you can get multiple party tags from multiple people. It's a black market. Yeah. And so the DNR was told, hey, by the governor, hey, you need to close these loopholes. There's these loopholes in the laws. People are skirting them. Close them. Well, when they were redefining a bunch of little laws, one of them is the law for public land, specifically that the tree stands are the only thing allowed. Well, it was tree stands are allowed out overnight. They have to be, they can't be up 2 weeks before, and they have to be taken down 2 weeks after season, but nothing else can be. Well, that nothing else got expanded to literally everything else. Gotcha. And when that got expanded to everything else, somebody like that kid in the back of the class that reminds the teacher about homework was like, oh, what about trail cameras? You know, that doesn't quite fit. Yeah. And the DNR just said, throw them in there. And so you could put them out. That's not what they didn't say you couldn't put them out, but you had to remove them every single day at the end of the hunt.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, come on, you know, so, but it essentially killed trail cameras. And so they ended up shelving it. A lot of people had an uproar. They ended up shelving it, and they're going to revisit it down the line. What that means, I don't know, because they were also talking about when they said you couldn't do trail cameras or whatever. There was another law that is specifically about using electronics to help hunters hunt. Mm-hmm. And somebody said, well, hey, a cell cam counts as an electronic, right? It is an active device that sends you information in real time, because you're not even allowed to use cell phones. Like, if you see your buddy across the swamp and there's a buck cutting over to him, you cannot text or call him and tell him he has a buck coming to him. That is technically illegal in Iowa. Wow. So, yeah. So somebody was like, well, hey, if we're doing the whole public land cameras thing, what about cell cams in general? And the DNR actually piped up and was like, well, maybe we should just ban those entirely. And
I've heard it's been talked about in multiple states.
Mm-hmm. Some states it is.
Yep. And so that's where the trail cameras in general and public come up, and then cell cameras across the whole state for even private land come up. And when that popped off, and it wasn't just the public land guys, then some of the big guys that have some money on the private land side were like, okay, public land guys, come here. We're gonna make something of this. And then they all joined together, and it got shelved for now. So we'll see what comes of that. I know that's going to be talked about at least next year and the year after. And they put out a little written, I can't remember. I'm blanking here, but they put out basically like a statement. They're like, hey guys, go through and choose what of these new laws you guys would be okay with, or new rule changes. And filled it out, and you would send it back in. So
just the same thing.
We have like a bow hunter's survey or a deer hunting
survey.
It goes through the county that you hunt, how many deer you saw, all that. But then they sneak it into the end, and most people don't really know what they're looking at unless you're somebody that knows a lot of the laws and follows it as much as we are. We see it at the end, these questions. It's like, should we have a velvet hunt, or we should have this, or we should have that? And they're basically just feeling you out to what you would like.
Yeah.
Kind of go touch back on what you said with the Midwest and public land. I never really was a big public land guy. I don't really hunt public land here in Indiana. Every couple of years we do something on public land, but I went to Missouri with these guys last year, and that's a whole nother ball game, bud. They got me hook, line, and sinker. We'll be there next week. There's a group of us going next week for 4 days or whatever it is, 5 days. I'm jacked up because it is fun. The adventure that you talked about and all that kind of stuff. We don't get that with our private land here at home. Even though we're chasing some really nice deer at home, and we kind of know how it's going to play out year to year. You kind of have to sharpen your pencil, kind of got to know what you're looking for a little bit to put yourself in the right situation. if you don't, it could be hell. You may not see a deer the whole time you're there.
So, Cody, I've been pretty fortunate myself. So I usually hunt out of state 2 weekends of the year, basically. And my biggest buck came from Kentucky on state property. It scored 152. And still I hunt so much private land around here, and I still can't beat that record. And then my biggest one came off public land. And last year in Missouri, I missed 2 good ones. Pope and Young, nothing bigger than 150s, but it was Pope and Young's. And so I owe Missouri, I'm on a mission.
Yeah, for me, public land, I'm like I've told you guys, I'm really ate up with it. Iowa it's not as good as what people say it is for public land, and a lot of it just comes from the stories from 10 years ago, 15 years ago at this point. A lot of that, like early 2000s and even into like the 2010s. Iowa was so good. Iowa was truly a hidden gem, public or private. I mean, you could go and there really was a 150, even like a 160 around every tree. I mean, it was ridiculous back in the day. The stories I hear about it, that was before my time coming out here. The stories I hear about it from the guys who lived out here and hunted, it was a whole new world. But unfortunately, a lot of EHD had come through. And destroyed a lot of the population. And then some law changes happened that made it a little bit easier to hunt with a gun and certain things. They got rid of. They started doing like straight case cartridges, which it used to be only shotguns. That's it. And you couldn't technically like use buckshot while you're pushing deer. It had to be slugs. And so there was a lot of specific laws and rules and how they've divvied up their the hunting in Iowa that gave a lot of advantage to the deer. The numbers were just phenomenal. And then unfortunately those laws changed and EHD came through, wiped a bunch of areas out completely, age class wise, number wise. And some of those areas have been trying to come back. And it seems like the past every 5 or 6 years, we get another wave of EHD. We just had another wave come through last year.
It hit us this year.
We're having a big wave here again at home, and we thought we were, out of it. What I would say 2019, 2020, somewhere right in there. We had a monster wave come through too, and really wipe out a lot of deer. I know him and some guys went down on kayaks and found 30 plus on the river. I mean, numbers that'll make you absolutely sick. And we were starting to, come up out of that, and it's starting to hit pretty hard again this year. We're finding a lot of deer on the river.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, Cody, do you remember EHD ever hitting when you were younger? Like, I don't remember cases of it. It seems like the last 10 years, that's all we hear now.
Especially being from Michigan, no, that was like never anything I ever heard about. The first time I even heard enough about it was pretty much watching Midwest Whitetail back in like when they had the show in like 2012, and Bill was talking about it. They had a year where it killed 80-90% of the bucks on his farm. I was like, wow. What is EHD? And that's when I looked into it and started hearing about it all. So that's when I first, caught on to EHD. Like I said, we just had a wave come through this last year. I found some pockets in kind of the area that I hunt in. Just seems to whatever reason, it's like a little micro pocket. It just doesn't seem like there's much EHD that ever has happened. I've talked to the neighbors. They even said they haven't ever seen too much EHD. I think it's because it stays wet all the time, even in drought years. We've had these drought years. And it's just that area just always stays wet. So I think, and that happens to be the area with Cesar. I think that area has gotten through, so I have a pretty nice area there. But some of my other spots, I've stuck some cameras back in, and they're pretty dead. So I think last year really hammered on them pretty hard. But yeah, like I said, public land is in Iowa. It's good. Don't get me wrong. And if you're in the right neighborhood and you're up against the right farm, it can still be phenomenal, and chasing a 140, 150 is completely doable if you have enough time, but it's not as good as it used to be. And the big misconception that everybody always has that they're coming out here and they're going to go after.
Guaranteed.
It's guaranteed. I'm going to come after, and I'm going to, I hear it all the time. Well, I've shot some 130s and some 140s. I'm really looking for something like a 150, a 160. I'm like, yeah, me too, man. Good luck.
Yeah. Now, didn't Zach from Public Hunting start with Midwest as well?
Yeah, there's a lot of
There's
A
quite
couple
a
of
few
guys
people that
did.
came out of there. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of guys did, and there's been some offshoot shows too. Some other smaller YouTubers, or they're bigger than me now, but there's been quite a few shows that guys come out of there.
That's
You know,
awesome. So they've done
Aaron
something
was
good for
originally
you.
Aaron was originally off the show as well.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, a lot of those guys all kind of split and started doing their own thing. That's really how, if you go back and you watch those old public land blogs where it's like Zach and Aaron,
Yep.
and they're out there on the public land, and how they film it, where it's filmed like the old Midwest whitetail videos, and like how they're trying to do it like quality wise and getting on the bucks and hunting. And maybe, you know, and I'm not knocking them, but maybe not so much their newer stuff where they kind of look like they're running and gunning a little bit more and kind of winging it a little bit, and just kind of getting out there. And yep, they're having fun making jokes, and that's cool. But I'm a pretty serious hunter. I take my hunting really seriously. It's something that I enjoy. And so if you look at their old public land blogs on Midwest Whitetail, that's actually kind of how I try to base my show, and what I try to design it as. My goal with the show is to hunt, you know, private land caliber bucks, 145 inches up, just solid bucks, or just whatever's really, you know, a little bit above average for the area. You know, I'm going to try to go after a 140 here in Wisconsin, but if a nice 130s comes in, I can't say that I wouldn't be tempted. But that's kind of what I try to mold my show around, is just that little bit higher quality, and I get a little bit better with it every year. And a little bit, you know, bigger bucks, but doing the public land thing, but being serious about the public land. You know, not being like that run and gun kind of joking, kind of goofy style. That's just not me. I take it a little bit more serious.
So Cody, 2 takeaways I had on watching your videos before this podcast was, one of them is you could tell you're dedicated. You put scouting time in, like a ton of it. I can see that just in the one video I watched. Then the way, I don't want to say it out loud because it may frustrate you, but the way you handled a miss, like I was like, man, that's impressive. Like you didn't beat up anybody, you didn't beat yourself up. It was just, you were like, okay, I'm gonna figure
camera.
it out. Yeah, like it was impressive. Like it was one of the best times I've ever seen. Like I've watched YouTube videos. I go to sleep watching deer hunting. Like that's all I do. And then I'm always talking to Brett about them. But like the way you handled a miss was one of the better times I've ever seen, and it was cool and interesting to how you talked about it and handled it.
Yeah,
I will give you that.
So that's something that, you know, I have a couple misses on the channel. I'm not gonna lie.
I didn't want to bring it up.
You know, it at the end of the day, it happens to everybody. And I've been on the back end of the industry, and the amount of times where on the back end they cut out whole entire stories with deer because they either made a bad shot and the deer ran off, they either never found them and it died, or it recovered and it has come out, you know, moved on through the years. But maybe they've changed gears to another deer, or just in general missed a deer, had, you know, anything like that. The hate you get on social media is pretty bad, to be honest. It's pretty brutal. But regardless of that, and I was definitely informed to not show that side of things, but you know, I've watched a lot of shows, and it just doesn't. I just want to be genuine with my audience. I want to show them that I'm just like
to the rest of us.
I'm just like everybody else out there, and you know, I've definitely gotten lucky with a little bit of skill, and I've shot some really nice bucks on public land. You know, I have my 2, you know, booners above me here. Solid bucks, and I have a wall of some Pope and Youngs and whatnot. But I just want to show guys that even, you know, I'm not a robot. I'm out there hunting, and when you know, one of these type of bucks, a 150 or something comes in, I mean, crap, even a 140 or anything, even just a 120. When I see them coming in, and I think you can see it with the cameras, my camera work instantly becomes terrible because the tree's probably shaking just as bad. I've been picked out of the tree because I'm in small trees and the whole tree's, you know, shaking, and the deer looks over like, what is going on over there, you know? But I love it, and if I ever lose that feeling, I'll quit hunting. The guys rip on me all the time. But I absolutely love it. And that just, you know, I practice, and I'm a pretty decent shot with my bow. I can shoot 50, 60 yards and keep a pretty tight group. But man, when those giant bucks come in, it's a whole new world, I forget to breathe. The tree's shaking, like, you know, and I'm trying to incorporate the filming into things, and I just try to take it in stride, and I show everybody that, and I show them that I'm a real person, and I know I'm going to get hate for it regardless, but
I thought it was awesome. Just the way it was handled and everything, I thought it was a great video. I really did.
I know how you feel. I was in a very similar situation last year, and I even said it in the video. I'm like, I'm gonna catch so much shit for this. I rushed it, and that happens when you get on an animal of that caliber. Sometimes your brain is absolutely fried. You're lucky to even remember what happened. Sometimes, but I think it was good. Obviously for you that your channel does very well, but for our channels too, to say, hey, we mess up sometimes. This is what happened. I'm not fudging anything. This isn't Hollywood. This is exactly what happened. You've seen it play out. I think when they can relate to you like that, I feel like you gain a lot more respect and a lot more number of followers, really.
Yeah, well, I hope so. You get some haters in there too, but hey,
for sure, you get
those
a lot
comments. People don't realize those comments and those thumbs down. They still help boost you in the algorithm. Why, I don't know, but
right.
So bring it on. Give me the hate. Give me some more views somewhere.
But I definitely wanted to highlight Iowa. You may be the first person I have had on from Iowa. So it's something that's in our future. I have 3 points. He has 1. We want to make that trip over there at some point. So I just wanted kind of to highlight Iowa as a whole. And you touched on a lot of it earlier, but something that me and him gained from looking at that graph they make on points and how many points you have, and you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yep.
We noticed a lot more gun hunters are getting drawn at a very early stage
with 1 point.
With 1 point in some of the bigger zones that people are wanting to go for. What exactly you figure? I don't know. There's no advantage or disadvantage of being a bow hunter over a gun hunter, but everybody wants to do it with a bow. You feel like bow hunting is bigger than gun hunting sometimes, but maybe not. I mean, why do you think that they're taking gun hunters over bow hunters?
So it's not that they're necessarily taking them; it's that there's less people applying for those spots.
Okay.
And so when you get a number of people that have 2-3 points, and they're applying with those 2 or 3 points, for a zone for like a shotgun season or a late muzzleloader season, if as long as you're only, they'll fill it from whoever has the most points first down. So if you're getting most of your guys with 5-6 points applying for the bow seasons, and then guys who have, less points are applying, maybe there's still guys applying with 5 or 6 points for a gun season, in some of these hotter zones, they go through and then they have a quota, they just have a listed quota. And then if they go through the guys with the higher points, then they start going into guys that have applied with lower points. And there's areas that are just known that people put in, and if you put in with 1 or 2 points, it's pretty common you can draw. Even in my area, you can draw on a late muzz tag with pretty consistently 2 points. It's possible on 1, but 2 points is pretty much a guarantee for my area for a late muzzleloader season. The main reason why is because our gun seasons are outside of the rut, and they force you to pick. So we have 2 shotgun seasons. So there's a shotgun split, and then there's I don't believe non-residents can do our early muzzleloader season, so you can only do the late muzzleloader season.
Yeah,
so if you're doing that and you're coming out to hunt public land, the gun seasons on public land, especially the shotgun seasons, are pretty brutal. I mean, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth, even for me out here, just because, like I was talking earlier, a lot of people don't realize that Iowa it's like the 48th out of 50 states for how little public land we have compared to the size of the state. And then if you actually put into in regards to cover type, it's like 80% of the state is crop fields. Yeah. So we have no cover, and then a lot of what the public land isn't. There's a lot of sections of public land that are just farm fields. Maybe they're overgrown, but there's still no trees in them, or they're actively farmed because the Iowa DNR will lease out the farmland. So they're just farm fields.
That's awesome though that they do that.
It's cool.
Indiana doesn't do it.
No, yeah. Indiana doesn't do that.
So it's cool. Don't get me wrong, but what that leads to is we have whole areas where there's next to zero public land to hunt, but we have 500,000 hunters, and people don't realize it. Doesn't sound like a ton, and it's not, but our deer population is 430,000. So we're one of the only few states where we actually have more hunters, and that's not doesn't include that hunters get into like extra light. You can hunt multiple bucks, so each hunter can kill 2-3 bucks. If you're a landowner, you can kill like 4 bucks. If you're a real goat getter and you live in the city, you can kill like 5 bucks a year by getting like a city tag, your 2 bucks, your landowner tags, a party hunting tag, because landowners can still pull that, and that doesn't even include that some farmers can get reclamation tags, and so there's areas where people are killing 4, 5, 6 bucks a year. And so you're having, you have more hunters than you do deer. You have some of the least amount of huntable terrain, which just, what it is out there is just farmland and ditch roads. Don't get me wrong. There's some deer that live out there, but especially once the fields are off, that doesn't sustain deer. So people just don't understand that a lot of Iowa, especially coming to public land, it's not good. it's really not. And your shoulder, sometimes it's as bad as other states where you go to. I won't claim it's as bad as Wisconsin, but it's just on par with some of these other states. Even like Indiana to a point, and parts of Ohio, and there's vast areas. There's vast areas of Iowa that I won't even touch because they're truly that bad. Wow. And then even in some of these good areas, public land speaking, outside of individual pockets and just knowing the key areas, but I feel like you can say that about every place. I feel like there's probably areas in Ohio and Illinois that are the same way. But in regards to just generalize, public land out here, it's good. Don't get me wrong, but it's not phenomenal by any means. And I get people all the time, oh, look at your show, you're on giant deer. I'm like, dude, I dedicate my entire life to this. Yep. This is all I do. I missed 3 days of the entire season last year, and that was it. I was out there every day, morning and night, filming, and I put 600-700 miles on just shed hunting, and then another 500-700 miles on postseason scouting. I'm like, I'm gonna see these extra bucks. But when it comes in regards to gun hunting specifically, if you're a non-resident and you're drawing and you're coming out here, you're gonna get like a week and a half for your gun season, for the entire gun season. You're coming out to public land. All the food's taken off. The deer are back on a food pattern. There is public that is left with food, but if you think you're going to be the only dude out there hunting that, you're mistaken.
It's on the pumpkin patch.
Yeah, and on top of that, pushing is a huge cultural thing out here. So, got a public land through the entire first two shotgun seasons. Guys, before they go hunt their family farms, or they just won't push their family farms, they get everybody together, and it's just tradition where they just push entire thousands and thousands of acres of public land. I mean, you'll have parties of 15, 20, 30 dudes, and they'll just stack up and push entire swaths of public land. I mean, just tens of thousands of acres of public land. They'll push all these sections.
They haven't pushed for party hunting to be gone like that.
Some people have, and there's always
that's never been a law in Indiana. You've always had to have a hunting license to hunt, and if someone else kills it, you can't tag it. Or if you kill something,
residents will still have, they won't necessarily just be doing party hunting. Some of them will. Yeah. Some of them will have tags out there. Be hunting it, but it's just the fact that there's so many of them and they're pushing them, and we don't have a lot of public, and the public we do have is extremely open a lot of times. I mean, there is some sections where you can find some kind of rolling big timber stuff, especially in the area where I live. That's why I live here. But there's a lot of the areas of public that are just flat and they're open, and you get 20 guys and you push it, and you better hope they miss, because that's the only thing that's going to come out of there alive. and you'd be surprised, people, especially like the shotgun culture in Iowa, they're not out there pushing public land for 150s, 160s. They're shooting those Pope and Youngs, and I mean, I wouldn't say anything, but they're definitely shooting those 2- and 3-year-olds that pop up. Like, they might let that scrub buck go, but you'd be real surprised. You come to Iowa as a non-resident, and you're looking at the residents who live here, and they're just happy with their 115-inch, 120-inch buck, and you're like, well, you guys live in Iowa, though.
Yeah, what are we doing?
What are we doing here? I have better standards than the residents. What is happening? But it's pretty bad. So that's that's why for a lot of guys, that's why that you can get, a couple points and come out with a gun rather than bow season, because bow in the rut, there's less guys hunting. We have less of a bow hunter population out here. Plus, you don't got guys pushing through whole areas.
Yeah.
And then with the rut, the bucks go crazy out here in the rut, and you really get a lot of those bucks on those bigger farms. That's when those bucks will come out of those bigger farms, mile or two. And if you're up in an area that has public, maybe there's been no deer all year long there, but for 2 weeks, it's like, man, this spot's the Mecca. You gotta, because that farm is so heavily managed that the 2-3 older bucks within an area, they just lock all those does down, or they just beat the brakes off of anything in that area. And there might be 3 or 4 4-year-olds that the 4-year-olds out here can be 160 inches. And so it's like, well, where are they going to go? They're going to range out and they're going to find these does in other areas. And well, if you know where there's a nice little doe factory on public land and you get the right timing, I mean, I got some of the absolute biggest deer on camera that I've never seen outside of mid-rut. I got multiple spots where I hang a camera every year just to see what rolls through, because without fail every year, it might be nighttime or it might be daylight one year. Just lunacy giant buck, like a 180 plus or something, will just come out of some of these farms. And I've been in those areas, velvet filming and doing everything. You never see these deer. You don't know about them. They're cored in deep into the neighbors' farms that are multiple thousands of acres or whole managed areas where everybody's managing. And then all of a sudden, boom, there's, you've been hunting this 140 all year thinking he's a big deer. And then, this crazy non-typical 180 comes out of nowhere and he's there for 2 days and gone. Yeah. But you just never know. That kind of leads back to the hunting the public thing of you never know. It's an adventure. And one of these days, something like that will happen where I'll just be perfect timing, right place, right time, and some lunacy big giant buck will come off. That like 211 typical that got shot on public land. They did a couple articles about it from last year. I can't remember.
Typical?
Yeah, 211 typical. I have pictures of that buck specifically from 2 years ago. He predominantly was on the neighbor's private into a big piece of private land, and he ended up getting killed last year. Just an absolute brute. And that's how he died. I mean, this buck, like everybody in the area, whitetail adrenaline guys were hunting that area. I'd pull up and their truck would be over there. The hunting public guys, you'd get on camera in that area. Like everybody knew about this buck. This was a well-known buck in the area, just an absolute giant. But he lived basically only on this farmer's land that nobody was allowed to hunt. And then the neighbors around him all tried, they were all trying to kill him. And the dude that ended up killing this buck, buck just happened to be coming through public land at that time, rolling. He talks about the buck rolling off of a ridge, and the ridge that he's talking about, actually, once it gets down to the bottom, it rolls into private. And that's where that buck was always at. And I hunted that buck a couple times, but it was just a ghost. The buck was hardly there, and he just happened to be in the right spot at the exact right time. And the buck rolled through, and the dude killed it. And it's like, well, that's cool. I guess I got a couple pictures of it, which was sweet. Still some of the, I think it is the biggest buck that I still have pictures of to this day. And that was back a couple years before that. But that buck had been fully mature for a while and in and around that 200 mark, and just a beast. Yeah. Crazy. He made a 160 that was next to him look like a little 140. I tell guys, they're like, wow, that's a big deal. That buck, they're like, that buck's like 180, 190. I'm like, no, he was 200. They're like, you sure? I'm like, yeah, that buck got killed. That was 164. And they're like, whoa, oh, okay. And you could just like stick that buck's rack right into that guy,
The biggest buck I've had on camera is about I know he scored like 182. And I killed a buck that year, and I took my oldest boy with me, and we jumped him up. He was actually with a doe that evening, and that next morning he got killed 3 miles from where we seen him. I mean, just one night, 3 miles.
Yeah. So I have some bucks. I have some bucks on public land, which they kind of counteract my. I talk about long lining in some podcasts and backtracking bucks with trail cameras, but I have bucks that you arguably can't do that with, where I'll get pictures of them on the complete opposite side of the public land, which is 2.5 miles away as a crow flies, and they're going over ridges.
Yeah.
And then that evening, I got them at dark coming out of the swamp or something, out of the main bedding, and they're right at dark. And I have the picture of them there. And then at 1, 2 in the morning, they're 2.5 miles away feeding in a field. And then the next morning, they're cruising through one of the rut funnels down in the middle of the swamp at 8 in the morning. Like, man, you know, is a mover. But those bucks, I got a couple of them. I got one I call Poseidon. He's just an old, gnarly looking buck. Like everybody knows about him on the public. He's a great buck. He doesn't score real high, but he's just been around so long. Tank of a body. I call him Poseidon because he looked like he has tridents. That's how his horn's set up on his either one of them. Yeah, it's pretty cool. And they're like palmated and whatnot. They're really sweet buck, but like everybody I talked to about him, they're like, yeah, I got pictures of him over here, and like 2 miles away, I got pictures of him over here. And I'm like, yeah, I got pictures of him over here. So like everybody's trying to hunt the buck, but nobody knows where where to even hunt the guy at because he just jumps around so much. But that's less common. Most of the time, I find bucks that they stay pretty localized in there, especially once they hit the maturity. It's like just like Cesar. You know, if anybody's out there and watches the show and knows where Cesar is, you know, I appreciate you not going in and sitting the exact tree because if you watch the videos, it's like the area doesn't change. You know, a lot of my videos last year were filmed in one specific couple 100-acre area, and that's just because, you know, I'm not going to get exactly into, you know, where, but Cesar predominantly cores in like a 40-acre patch, and he just doesn't leave. He'll range out, and it's hard to hunt him where he's specifically at. That's why I hunt the edges and try to wait for him to come to me and whatnot. But you know, he's just, that's where he's going to die out there one day. That's his spot, and that's where he is, and that's where he's always going to be. You know.
So roll this story out of Cesar. Talk about it from the beginning, and just kind of roll into how it's kind of played into, like you said, a rivalry with this big buck on public.
Yeah, so coming off of the year I shot this buck over my shoulder, which it's a 160-inch 8, really solid buck. Wow. I was hunting in the area that would kind of become adjacent to Cesar, and I'd found this area and started hunting it. And the day or the couple of days leading up to hunting him and killing him, I was sitting there and I'm watching across this area. You can see a lot here, and I'm just watching giant buck after giant buck after giant buck through here. I'm like, wow, this area is it's just stacked with bucks. And so I had hung a couple cameras late, killed this buck, left the cameras out over season, and I pulled them, and man, just the area had tons of bucks. I mean, just a boatload. And I couldn't believe how many bucks were in this area. So going into the next year, which this would be 3 seasons ago now, I set out to, you know, hunt this area, and I set up all these cameras and whatnot. And it was October like 4th, I believe. I come in to check a camera a little bit adjacent to where, again, I had killed this buck over my shoulder. And the camera was right off the road. I tell guys all the time about putting cameras right on the road and just catching bucks, especially in the summertime, coming out of the private, going into the public. It's super easy. You're not intruding. You're not messing up whole areas, but you capture these bucks cruising the road. And it's like, I just needed to know that a deer was going into here in this general area. It's all bedding. I just needed he's going in there at some point, and I'll start diving in and backtracking this buck. And so I pulled the camera, and I was talking to a buddy, and he was already, because we had just pulled some of the other cameras, and he's like, man, it's like, you're all over these giant bucks. And he made a joke right as I was checking this camera and flipping through the photos. He's like, you're like that like dog whisperer dude. What's his name? It's like Cesar or whatever. And I kind of laughed, and I flipped a picture, and I had one photo of the buck that I'll call Cesar. And this is when he had his big rack on him. He's facing away from the camera, so he just looks giant, you know. And he was probably 160 some inch clean 10 back then. And I was like, that's a crazy buck. And I had some cameras deeper back. And so I went back and I checked some cameras a few minutes later, and he was all over those cameras, but daylight. And I was like, okay, so this is a hunter. He's not way back. He's actually, kind of up in and around this area. And so I was like, I'm going to call this buck Cesar. I thought that was a funny name. I was like, all right, we'll call him Cesar. It just makes sense. And so I started hunting that area looking for this buck. And I knew he was in there, had some cameras in there. At that point, I had put I swapped them out for cell cameras, got pictures of him almost right off the rip, and started hunting this buck. And it was late October. I had my first visual encounter with him. There was a couple nights where I'd hunt a spot, leave, and he'd come walking through on cell cam just right, a few minutes later. Dang it. But it was late October, and I'm sitting there, and this actually was, the first time I ever saw him. I wish I just would have recognized that where I saw him at dark, being late October, and the way he was coming towards me. I wish I would have just been like, oh, he obviously lives slightly over here, versus where I had been primarily trying to figure out where he lived and where I thought he lived. And I was hunting him where I thought he would be, not where he was actually, at. And and so that's on the channel where I got my first encounter with him. He's out by a single pin oak out there, and he's just ripping it up. I rattled to him. He ends up coming in, but by the time he comes in, I have no camera light, and I pass him at like 45 yards. I mean, guys tell me all the time, you should have shot him. It was a blob. I mean, I knew it was him. He was standing there. He's a shape. Could I have ripped one at him? Probably. It would have been off camera. Shooting light was probably gone, if not, right at that level. And so that was my first encounter with him. Once I had that encounter, I was like, I got to hunt this buck now. This is cool. I actually am on this buck and hunting him. And so I start hunting him through November, and I get another sighting of him like sometime in November. It was beginning of November. I get a sighting like November 5th or whatnot. I'll chalk it up to where that season I had another 3 or 4 sightings from November 1st through I think the 18th or 19th, and of where he was in the area. And I'd still get cell camera pictures of him where I'd be hunting 100 yards on the opposite side of this thicket, and I'd get a picture of him at 9 in the morning cruising. He's just on the other end of the thicket of me, and I'd get up and I'd get all ready, and he'd just never come down my lane. I don't know where he'd go or what he'd do, but he would just not come in, even though coming right to me within 100 yards. I don't know where he went, but he's somewhere. I knew he was in there, but not. I had multiple times like that during that time period, and like I said, like another 3 or 4 episodes where I visually and get him on camera where I see him. 2 of them, he's like 50 yards, and he was with a doe, and he's just standing there, and I'm trying to grunt to him. He can't see. We got some bushes between me and him. I'm trying to grunt to him and get him to pull off the doe and come over to me, and he just looks, and he's just, nah, I got her. I don't know what you're doing, but we ain't going over there. And then it was November 20th that he ends up finally. I knew he was in the area still. He was on a late doe, and finally he ends up coming in, pushing this doe, and I have it all on film. I'll be the first to say I made a terrible shot, but I tried to stop him as he was coming, basically running by me. He doesn't stop broadside in my opening, but he turns at like 15 yards, stops, and then basically he looks right at me. I mean, he just looks right at me, and I've been chasing this buck. He's already super spooky. He's old. And at this point, even when he was chasing this doe, he's trying to keep her in the thicket. So I'm like, man, he knows what's up. And he's looking straight at me. I'm like, he's not gonna just go back to chilling. This buck is gone. I'm full draw. I had screamed at him to stop him. So I tried to make a chest shot on him. I know it's pretty controversial. Like I said, I'm a pretty good shot, but unfortunately, I pulled, or I think what happened is I actually looked down to check, make sure he was still in frame. When I did that, my anchor point moved. And then I kind of put my face back up, and I let her rip, and it hit high, and I ended up hitting him high in the neck. If I had a higher poundage bow or longer draw length, I would have went into the chest cavity, but I'm a really short guy. So unfortunately that with low poundage, I didn't get the penetration. So I just got neck. I ended up getting a dog come in. I gave him plenty of time. He didn't die. That's the story to that one. He didn't die. He showed back up on camera 2 days later, chasing does in the thicket, and he kind of disappeared after the 25th, as he usually does in that area. He moves on to a late season range, which is up into the neighbor's property. And so I went on to hunt other deer that year. I had a couple missed opportunities that season on some really nice bucks late season. Got Gary Grunow from the Hunting Beast on a really nice buck that he was able to harvest. And so I went buckless that year. And then, like I said, a lot of good opportunities, and I had made my shots. I just didn't connect. And so then, now we roll into last year. Cesar was alive. I was all excited. He was all lopsided though, because he took a 4-blade Grim Reaper to the neck the last year. And
from an injury. Yeah.
the neighbor said that he looked like he almost died through the winter. He was really surprised he lived. He said that he was really small, really raggedy, and his one side, he probably shrunk. He probably lost 10, 15 inches last year. He went from like a clean 165-inch 10 down to a 9, probably like low 50s. He had a really messed up brow. He didn't grow his G4 on one side. His frame shrunk a little bit. His beams just weren't as long. He didn't quite put as much mass on. You could tell it was him. There's even a real nice mark on his neck from me. He'll have that forever. But hunted the crap out of him last year. I was all over him. I know I should have killed that. I should have killed him last year. I should have killed him the first year, but I made the bad shot, and I should have definitely killed him last year. I was all over him. I have numerous episodes. I mean, 4 different encounters of him within 60 yards, chasing does, just either can't get him to stop or he's just, pushing him around. I had one where he's running into me. I still don't know for the life of me how. I'm on the back side of the tree. He's just running right to me. He gets to like 50 yards, dead stops, looks right up at the tree at me and turns. I'm like, how did you even know I was here? I mean, I had like a sixth sense. He busted me, and then I had
the same tree you shot him at the year before?
No, different tree. I didn't hunt that tree all last year because I was like, there's no way this buck is stupid enough to walk by this tree in daylight. Guess who has photos of him in daylight? Right by that tree.
Right by.
So this year though, we're gonna hunt that tree. It's already prepped. Nice. Maybe we'll kill him out of the first tree that I ever hunted. Got close to him, and that'd be a interesting
cool
story.
Yeah.
But I had an encounter where I had a hunter come in. He walked right down the lane underneath of me. I thought the hunt was ruined, and where he went into, he went right into the main bedding, and I'm like, well, all the deer are gone. I thought they would.
That's the episode we watched.
We were watching
that
one.
Yeah. So that's right at about the end of October. I had already had like 2 encounters with Cesar, pretty far out, where he was kind of way out in some of the CRP marsh, but regardless, getting to see him was cool. I'm like, he's alive. He's in the area. I know he's using the trails again. We're going to get on him. And so end of October, here comes, I'm sitting there, and here comes that hunter. He comes right down the lane, right underneath me, doesn't even see me, walks right. I mean, just right. He came through. I hate knocking guys, but he came through the front half of the bedding, which is where I shot Cesar the year before. And there's still other big bucks in there. The dude comes through right through that bedding, pops out into this little divide between the 2 bedding pockets, and then goes straight into the back bedding as well. and then just, dude sounded like a moose coming through there. I mean, just plowing through and gets right to the back bedding. And I just watch him go in. And dude, this back bedding area is, maybe if you drew a little area, it's like 3-4 acres. It's not huge. So I'm like, there's nothing left in here, right? They've all blown out. They've probably heard this moose coming through already. And I'm hunting there specifically because Cesar at this time is known to come down this little cut lane between the bedding and this marshy CRP. And he comes down this lane right about the end of October every year. And he hammers this scrape right down in front of this stand every year. I have daylight photos of him doing it for the past, it's going to be 3, I've had 2 years of him doing it now. And I'm like, this buck, he's going to be here. He's been here these dates before. And so I'm pretty salty. I'm like, what the heck, this dude coming in here at this time, plowing through here. And by the way, there's an easier way. And I did talk to the guy. I was like, if you want to hunt back there, it's public land. I get it, man. But afterward, I talked to him, like, I showed him on the maps. I'm like, come in the back way, come through here and drop into the creek and come up through here. And it's like, you can go right up that ditch and get right to that tree that you hunted right next to. I'm like, way back. You're like, it's money, my man. Don't get me right. Like, plus you don't got to burn the front thickets out. And like, there's even a trail that comes down the back side on the other side of the river, dude. He'll take you right down there. It's real good. Like, don't do this again, please. But he burned through there. And I'm like, well, my night's ruined. I'm kind of being salty, and I'm sitting there. All of a sudden I look up and boom, Cesar's right there at like 50 yards coming down that lane. And you can see him. He's looking back, and that dude, knowing I've seen him stand up a couple times at a specific spot. There's like a little pine tree up behind a locust tree back there that's kind of tucked up and in. And I'll bet you that dude walked within like 15 yards of him. Yeah, it's a little knoll, and that he's tucked in. And I've watched Cesar get up there, especially through the rut. I've watched him get up there with a doe numerous times. And so that dude probably walked right by him, and he's just like, what the heck, and let that dude walk right by him. And he got up and let him slide by. He got up and he come walking through, but he didn't like the guy's ground scent. And because the guy had walked that lane, that the cover lane, which is where most of the mature bucks do, because it's in a covered canopy, he kept walking and walking, and he got right to about 20 yards. And I just needed him to clear about 3 steps. And he's just sitting there smelling, and you can see on film, he's like, man, I shouldn't be walking right where this guy had come in, and so he ends up turning, and I lose my opportunity on a really close, clean shot there, which, I don't want to say I would have missed, but probably wouldn't have missed that shot. 15 yards standing underneath me.
That's what I told Brett. I seen him turn. I was like, man, that was crazy. That thing was he was coming to the money hole.
Yeah, and it was just because he kept smelling that guy, man, and he ended up choosing. He's like, I don't like this. We're gonna go somewhere else. And so he ends up backtracking out to like 45 and trying to go way out and around me. And you can see it in the video where he's coming through that brush line. And I have this one tiny gap at 45. And I knew if he made it another 5 steps, he was going to be in my wind. And because that's where I was blowing. I was already just barely blowing my wind off that lane, trying to give him that little bit of advantage. I'm not super big on saying that they will always use the wind, but I was like, it can't hurt. Like, if he has the advantage and thinks he has the advantage, good for him. Like, so, and then he comes out and he gets right in that spot, and I don't even stop him. I just let him naturally stop. But I had shot, and I mean, man, my arrow was like halfway out there, and Cesar was already like laying on the ground sideways turned. That arrow had no chance ever to get to him in time. I mean, he was gone. So I don't even know if it would have ended up hitting him or not. Regardless, I mean, it just went out there, and he was turned and already halfway back into the lane by the time the arrow made it out to 45. Because again, I shoot, lower poundage, short draw length. My arrows are boom, lobbing out there, and he
was on edge because the cover scent. So he was already. I mean, that didn't help you any.
Yeah, I think that he was. Yeah, I think he was just super, super spooky about that with that guy going through there. And once he got to the edge of the cover, he looked back. You could tell he's like, what was happening? I don't know. And then he shot into the thicket. And it was funny because that's the tree he come running from that I had the next encounter where he busted me in the tree. And I don't know what he was doing, but I was watching him go across. I'm like, no way, he's going to walk right by the tree that I had just shot out of on him. And I'm like, can't believe it. And he got near the tree, and I don't know if like a twig snapped or what had happened, but he got near the tree, and he turned inside out, man. And I don't know if he was just super spooky, but he got near that tree, and he's kind of walking, and you can see him looking, and then he just turned inside out, and he come trotting right out to me. And I thought that was a done deal at this point. I'm like, well, he's spooked about that. He's paying attention. That he's going to walk right underneath me, 15-yard shot. He gets into like 50 yards, and he's as he's walking to me, and the trail turns, and he's about to start paralleling and come right underneath me. And he just dead stops, looks straight up at me. And granted, I'm in like the only tree that's out there, but I was behind the limb. I wasn't like, at least I didn't think I was shaking the tree. Maybe I was. But I'm sitting there behind the limb, and I'm looking around the tree, and he dead stops, looks right up at me. You can just see it in camera. Looks right at me, and his eyes get big, and nope, boom, gone. Like, So, I had a couple other encounters with him where he was chasing some does. I have another whole thing where I put a stalk on him. I got within 40 yards, full draw of him. He had a doe bedded down. him just being lucky again. It's like me and him have each other's number. I'm always right there on top of him, but he just skirts the back door on me every time. I was full draw and I can see him, and he's looking at the doe, and I'm waiting and
the moment
I let down, he stands up and he took 2 steps and disappeared into that tall grass, and I was like, man, so.
Yeah.
Long-winded, but it's a whole saga at this point, and I've dedicated this season to ending it. We're gonna get on him and put a nail in his coffin for for this season.
That's an incredible story. Have you ever found any of his sheds?
No, because about November 25th, he always leaves and goes, I believe, across the road into the neighbor's private property. They have some agriculture over there, and that's where I believe he goes, because there's public everywhere else, and I've ran cameras for him everywhere else, especially where there's food, and I've never picked up on him. And I got other guys, especially guys who have hunted that area. I always end up talking to them, and they're like, yeah, I've seen the show. Oh, this is Cesar's area. And I usually bribe them with like other pictures of other bucks that are arguably, some of them are bigger, some of them are bigger deer. And I'm just like, hey, there's a 160 over here. Go over here and hunt that buck and just give me Cesar, and they're all cool about it, but they swap info with me. That's awesome. And a lot of them are like, yeah, we don't even know that buck exists, because he cores in that area. He's in there for the does, and I've still yet to actually get a picture of him in velvet or velvet film him. I went out to his area, and I was driving around this year, and I saw a buck that might have been him, but it was so dark. He crossed the road. I could not be 100%. So I don't want to put it out. Oh yeah, he's alive. I seen him, and then it ends up not being him. But, so my theory is that he's up in that neighbor's property, and I know they have food over there, especially late season. And that's my only thought of where he could be. And that particular neighbor, one, if it's not a 170 or 180, he's not shooting it. He owns a lot of property in that area. And 2, he just doesn't, I don't think he hunts that corner, and yet he has food back there. So I don't think he's ever, worried about, I don't think Cesar ever has an issue late season of being shot, because I think he just basically crosses the road and cores over in this one little spot for the winter, doesn't get messed with, and then he just comes right back over and lives in this other little spot in the public land. And the only person that he probably has to deal with is me all the time. He's like, man, it's this dude again. Like, go away,
You were telling me earlier that you were on the Whitetail Legacy podcast and a few others. So I gave some of those a listen, and I want you to kind of lay out the late season tactics that you've put together for public land. I was very intrigued. Never really thought of it that way. Of course, I'm not hunting Iowa. I'm hunting Indiana, so it's maybe a vast difference, and I'm not hunting public as well. So talk about that tactic that you do late season on public.
Yeah, that's something that I never wanted. Back in Michigan, I'll touch on this right quick. Back in Michigan, I never hunted past November 15th. If November 15th come in and I hadn't shot my buck, I was like, oh, my season's over. There's no good hunting left. And it was even beginning of November was like that for me. I used to be a late October guy. Mm-hmm. And so I come out to the Midwest and started hunting. And through my internship, I didn't get a ton of opportunities during the rut. And so I had to start hunting later in the year, which fell during the December time frame. And when I killed my 168, that was right at the end of this. It was December 28th. And so I was never a late season guy. I never put any, and I almost wonder if that's actually why I've arguably maybe became good at it. And I say that because I don't call myself good at it, but everybody else does, especially for public land in here. I constantly tell guys, oh, maybe I'll take one of the other gun seasons, or maybe I'll do this. And everybody, even some of the bigger names out here in public land, are like, dude, you see the most bucks out of any of us on public late season. Just go hunt your late season and keep doing it, because you have so many opportunities. I don't even have the show out for this year yet for my late season opportunities, and there's maybe 3 misses in there. We'll talk about that later. The scope was off, I swear. Well, it was actually, but maybe not the last one. The last one would have been me. But there's a lot of, I don't know, I just have really great opportunities for late season. And really what it comes down to is And I think a lot of it comes from the fact that because I went into hunting late season with no ideas of how to hunt it, I just started going out there and hunting it, and just, hey, this is where the deer were. This is where I was finding the sign. This is where I was finding the bucks. And it's brutal, but I think that somehow that has like transformed me into specifically, at least maybe a Midwest, a late season guy in the Midwest specifically. I don't know. We're going to see this year if that translates to other states. It might, because I did a lot of postseason scouting in Indiana and Ohio, Wisconsin, Illinois. I didn't find any sheds in Wisconsin. However, I did find some solid sign for a buck being in there late season. I was actually with Gary Grunow from the Hunting Beast, and that surprised him. He was pretty taken back. I was like, man, I'm telling you, this is like late season setup. He's like, no, there'd be no late season buck in this spot. I'm like, no, this looks. And then we get up there, we get up to like coming up out of the public, and there's a private cut cornfield, and we found a big giant buck track there, and we seen a buck with that we had bumped out of there that had no pedicles but big bases because it had shed, and he's like, oh man, there was. I'm like, I've told you, man. Like the late season's becoming my thing. But I found some great sheds in some other states for late season, obviously late season hunting as well. But anyway, for Iowa, it really comes down to finding these bucks that are long lining out to food. And I talk about long lining all the time, but I start by going into an area and looking for that summer food. And if I see an area that has a lot of summer food and I take note of the bucks that are in there, I tend to find that at least one of those bucks are going to be back in that area for late season. I don't know I've never heard anybody else talking about it, but I swear I have found numerous times where I'm in a spot in the summer and the same buck is in the same field or the field adjacent, right? Maybe the field adjacent has some leftover foods. The farmer picked it bad, or maybe the public, they left a little bit of food because they do that in Iowa here. But I have found that buck that I see in the summertime will be back in late season from midsummer. They kind of start to shift there in spring, and then they're really gone around this time now. They've already shifted their patterns, and you don't see them, and then they have like their fall ranges and whatnot. But when they first start growing and they're getting big and you can really tell what they are in that summer time period, I find a lot of my bucks that I end up hunting late season are in their ranges that I find them late season as well. And not all the time. If I see a buck, I should say I have a method. So if I see a good buck, I'm like, I would target him. I look at that area and I go, okay, do we have food? Well, most of the time you have food because it's, you're finding them in the summer. So okay, we have food. And then I start to look at terrain. If you're in a spot that's like, it's just fields, right? Like, okay, well, he's probably here for the summer. He's going to be gone somewhere else. But if you're in an area where it's already a secluded field or the field is adjacent to, I call it like depth of cover, whether that's private or public, I find that those, especially the more mature bucks, that are feeding there, they rut within that area, obviously, but they come back to there, or at least they feed in that pocket late season. Why? I mean, I'm not a biologist. I don't know. I have my theories. I just think it's familiarity, and they feed there in the summer, and the winter is their feed. They're kind of transitioning into that period again where they're working back on food. And if you really break it down, they need almost the same exact things in the summer as they do winter. They're in the summer, they're growing horns, but in the winter, they're just trying to keep themselves alive. The only difference is that they need that thermal cover. So if you're looking at a field and then you see that depth of cover or something close enough to be huntable, right? Maybe it's a private field across the road or a field or two away, and you see that buck, and then you look on the maps and there's not a lot of depth of cover, but the public is on the other side of the road and there's depth of cover that way. Maybe that buck will end up rutting on the private or out in those kind of that CRP land kind of stuff. But come in the winter, he's not going to lay out there because he needs that thermal cover, but maybe he wants to feed back out there. And so I found a lot of times where, again, using my trail cameras, hanging them right off the road on that trail that's coming from that food going into the public, I will capture the pictures of those bucks. And it's like they're just non-existent. And then right around the end of December, all of a sudden they're showing up coming from the public, crossing the roads, and then they're feeding out in the private. And you can't always hunt them out there, but I can do what's called long lining, which is where I basically backtrack them into the public, and I find that thermal cover that they're using from that depth of cover, and it's all based around seeing them in that field in the summertime. Sometimes I'm lucky and I can hunt the field edge, that they're coming into on public. But even then, sometimes if I do that and I put a camera there, they're not hitting it till way after dark, and so you got to start backtracking them. You got to find their long line, which really comes down to kind of the core basics everybody talks about, where you're going to get that southerly to east facing ridges. It keeps them, the morning sun catches them in the morning. You want to find those ridges with some type of cover type on them. I like cedars. When I find ridges with cedars that, are on that side of the ridge, the south to east side, those are like the areas that I tend to key in on for thermal cover. And I try to get between that spot and the food. It's obviously hard to get really tight to bed hunting late season because you come over one ridge and 4 ridges can see you.
Yep.
But it's a whole thing. I mean, we'd be here for hours. We'd have to really break down each individual thing. But that's kind of that's how, for a late season guy for public land, if you have food on the public or adjacent to public, it's a little late now, but I would have said in middle of the summer, if you went and you were velvet filming bucks or just watching bucks, I would not key in them for the rut, or unless your season coming in September, I wouldn't even key in on them come like September, October. I would actually go back. I mean, hang your cameras, hunt your areas, do what you want to do. But I would actually come back in and wait for late season, because I find that these mature bucks, and again, it's not a ton of them. It'll be like one, but one is all you need, especially on public land, that you'll sit there and you'll watch them in the field in the optimal areas. It'll be the same bean field that you see them in the summertime feeding in the same spot. They'll turn around and they'll be there towards the second week of December through January, and especially from that January 1st through the 10th, it seems like they just daylight like crazy, and that's probably from lack of pressure. But all the time there'll be a big buck that's there in the summertime, and he's just completely gone, and then he shows back up. And so as long as you start to key in, I like to key in around the beginning of December, get my cameras out for late season, start to get them around the field edges, and then on the ridges and the long lining opportunities, I start to put my cameras out backtracking, and it's like, sure enough, I pick up one of those bucks. And it's a lot more difficult because you're talking a giant field. You got one buck coming in, and you got to really key in and get lucky. But I see it all the time. There was another instance last year where this Big 10 had a split on the G2 and a little kicker coming off. I saw him a single time, one and only time. Midsummer, I was walking into this secluded bean field on public land. I just wanted to poke my head back there and see it. I'm like, okay, a couple 120s, 130s, whatever. And all of a sudden, this big buck, never seen him before, never had photos of him, didn't even know this buck existed, which surprises me because I hunt that area. I'm like, whoa, who's that? He stands up, he sees me, and he takes off. Wow, that's crazy. Put cameras out there. Never got another picture of him. Never saw him ever. Have no clue what happened to him. Hunting the crap out of the area. Have a camera on that field edge, probably 300 yards down. Same field, but 300 yards down to the east from where I had initially seen that buck. And I have like 4 pictures of him from the end of December through January coming out into that field and feeding. I'm like, wow. And I didn't even know this buck existed. I just seen him that one time, and all of a sudden he started showing up, and I'm like, and those moments like that prove my. I mean, actually, I could go into it. This one's documented. The bullwinkle buck that I have. Yeah, I have velvet footage of that buck. Tons of pictures of that buck. I hunted him specifically late season in that area. I have photos of him in that same spot in right at dark or nighttime coming in and feeding into that field. And so he had to be where he was feeding in the summertime. He was 300 yards across the creek on the back end of another field. There's a bunch of fields with some rivers that run through there. I had actually filmed him in the front, more towards the front field. And I have pictures of him late season numerous times, 300 yards just across the river in the backfield, which it just makes sense. That field had more beans in it. It's a little more secluded, especially in the wintertime. It wasn't quite up by the road. But that buck was very obviously using the same bedding area that he was using in the summertime. And all he did is just transferred 300 yards differently and started coming down into that other bean field. And I mean, now I have multiple hunts with that. Actually, I have hunts that are going to end up going on the channel here when I get the time to edit them about him. One of them, I missed a buck in that field, that exact field that I hunted or that I velvet filmed bullwinkle in. I missed a 150 some inch 9-point. That 9-point was the same buck that I have pictures that was running with bullwinkle. It's all on the show too. And that buck was within 30 yards of where I have pictures of him and bullwinkle on the show. The whole velvet film, and here's the buck coming in and doing all that. Where the pictures are, I was in the tree line behind those 2 deer when I shot at that buck in late season. And guys would never hunt that. I mean, guys would never think to hunt that because there's, you know, they hunt it in October and then the buck's not there, and then boom, they just show up the end of December and beginning of January, and you might only get 1 or 2 opportunities with them, but as long as you don't miss like me, it's all you need, man.
You think they kind of feel that pressure of, you know, the rut and all that stuff, and it kind of disappears, and then it's like you don't get as much pressure late season as you do during that late October rut period?
I think it comes down to a factor of pressure, but also a factor of that the buck, like I said before, what a buck needs in the summer and winter are almost identical outside of thermal cover, needing to be warm. And even that can just be chalked up to, I've seen bucks lay in open timber, just put their back against the log, and they're just on the south side of the hill. They're just on the south ridge, just being out of that wind. You know, I've even seen it where they just dive into a 15-foot ditch, and then they're just in that ditch, and that gets them out of the main wind. That's good enough for them. And I think it really comes down to, in the summer, they're just looking for food, and they're lazy. Deer are lazy. Easy access from food to bed. You know, that's something in late season a lot of guys don't understand, that where they hunt in the rut. I tell my friends all the time, I'm like, you guys are hunting rut trails. You guys are hunting bucks like you're hunting them in the rut. I'm like, it's as bad as it sounds. Like, it's simple, stupid. I'm like, look at that's where the bedding should be right there. And that's where the food is. Pick your trail in the middle. Like, just the one that goes from there to there. Like, don't look for rut sign. Don't look for buck sign. You see that one that goes from there to there with the easiest crossing on the river? That's probably the trail he's going to use. Like, they don't, if they don't have to do it and spend the energy, they don't want to do it. And like, it sounds so stupid and simple, but that's just all it is. And especially when it comes to, like I said, like, man, they fed in that field, and that field got left with food, and they were bedding somewhere in this, you know, up, maybe not right up into the thermal cover, but maybe they were on the hillside or up against the river right there, down in the bottom, because it was a little cooler with the wind. And I'm like, okay, so they went from there to, in the rut, they probably went deeper back up into the public or onto the neighbors where they had all the does, and they were running all over. And now it's like they're come back here, and instead of being right here where they wanted to be cool next to the river in the summertime because it's easy access food, they're just going to go 300-400 yards up into the ridge here, and that ridge has cedars on it or thicker cover, or there's an east facing side or a south facing side. They just tuck themselves in there, they ride it out, and then they just go from there right out to the same food source. If that food source wasn't overly pressured, then right there. Maybe if it was, but there's an adjacent food source, you know, they'll hit that up. Or if you get really lucky and there's like apple trees in between, or I've seen like you know, late oaks or locust pods. Locust pods are phenomenal.
Oh, absolutely.
If you can find those where they're up against the bedding, coming out of the bedding, you know, or down kind of by those rivers before they cross into like more of that ag country, those are almost always the spots where they all come down. They stage up in there, they hit that, and then they wait till dark, and then they pop right out into the fields. And I just get it all the time. Like, it's wild. Like I said, I got some episodes coming out on it that if guys weren't convinced from me talking about it on podcasts and the shows from last year, I have, like, the episodes will completely lay it out where I have picture proof of everything that I'm talking about happening, and being in these spots in velvet, filming bucks in here in velvet, and then turning around and going in, and 1 or 2 of those or multiple of them are just popping back up into December and January, and they're popping out. And again, it's not exactly perfect. They're not exactly doing the same thing on the same trail but man, you don't need to be perfect. You just need to know, and then get in there, especially with a gun. Again, just don't miss, and you're good to go. Don't pull a me and just absolutely, completely hit a tree at 60 yards and you'll be okay. But it's wild, and I don't hear anybody talking about it.
It's a real thing. I've experienced it myself. I've always said it for probably 4 or 5 years now that I do not want giants on camera in summertime, because they disappear when it comes to regular season.
Yeah.
To November. And then I had a buck 2 years in a row that I'd have in summertime, then he'd disappear like all my shooters do. They disappear. I get them on camera in summertime. Season comes in, they're gone. But I had one buck for 2 years in a row that he'd come back, shoot late November. Yeah, it was actually, I showed Brett the camera. Man, I was excited to hunt this deer, but like Indiana's one buck. So I would have to wait till December to hunt this thing. So I would never make it. I'd kill one before then. But I'm a believer in it for sure.
It really seems like that Christmas time is. I will catch a couple of them in those last couple weeks of December, but it really seems like that Christmas time for me is like somebody flips a switch.
It is.
That's really, I don't know if that's when everybody just decides they're done hunting and the pressure has alleviated completely at that point.
Yep.
But in and around Christmas, I'm actually, the buck that I missed, the 159 that was in the field where Bullwinkle was, that was Christmas. It was Christmas Day.
No kidding.
Yeah, it would have been a Christmas buck. It would have been a Christmas buck.
I think a lot of that pressure, I don't know what the percentage is, but a lot of people are tagged out before December. So you're already getting less and less pressure. Each day you're getting less pressure because people are tagged out. And then people give up. They ain't seeing all the sign that they used to. And like you said, a lot of people are hunting the rut area, so they're giving up. They ain't seeing the deer that they've been seeing.
Yep.
And so much people put so much emphasis on, I'm taking off the first or second week in November to hunt the rut, because that's what they feel like they can have that, just that time period of, you don't really know what's going to happen. But if you're in his boat, you're like, yeah, I'm going to do that for the most part, but I got it figured out late season, or I can get it done in this window, and there's not as many people. He's solely on public land. There's not as many people there, which is perfect.
So Cody, you have a plan A and a B. Most people just have plan A.
Yeah. Honestly, I'm not even a big rut hunter. Like everybody loves the first, like the beginning part of November. That's always been a thing. For me, it's not though. Even back when I lived in Michigan, I really liked about the second or third week of October, coming kind of all of that lull
that's my favorite
into where they start hitting those scrapes, and that's where I had a lot of success in Michigan. And then coming out to the Midwest, I had some. I actually shot 2 different bucks 2 different years, and it was only so like the late season when I hunted, and I killed this guy late season, the 168 over my shoulder. I had shot a buck third week of October, and he jumped into one of the big rivers out here. I was hunting a piece of public next to a giant river, and I shot him, and he jumped in this massive river, and I just watched him. He's probably 145, 150 inch 10. Just watched him float away. What was I going to do? I mean, it was a fast moving big river, and I was 30 yards off of it, and I shot him, and he just runs and just right off into this river, and I just watched him float down. Like, oh, bye. And the year after that is when I shot the 160 over my shoulder, and that was late November. So late November, I've determined like third week in November, that's my favorite rut time. I really like that because it seems like that's when I see the biggest bucks daylighting, so like the truly biggest bucks.
Do you pace yourself? Because a lot of people. I used to be that way. I'd start October 1st was our opening day here in Indiana, and I would hunt, and you just kind of get burnt out, like you're worn out. You get your butt kicked the entire time. Do you pace yourself to kind of stay in that rhythm, or how do you do that?
Well, I mean, I kind of have the YouTube show, and I'm trying to make it into like a viable thing, Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, I definitely don't pace myself. I hunt.
You're 100% go all the time.
I will not go in and burn my good areas.
Yeah.
There'll be a couple spots that I usually key in on that are good late season or not late season, but like middle of the rut, that I do get some bucks in around early October, that I'll go in, throw some sits, burning them a little bit. But like for Cesar, no. I got cameras in there. I got a bunch of cell cameras in there this year, and with my knowledge, I've gotten them set up. If I get him on some of them, and he's in there early October, I might try to dive in on him this year. But I don't think I've ever hunted him before like the 23rd, 24th of October.
That's what I told Brett the last couple of years. I'm not hunting until the 23rd. That's when my favorite time is.
So I get a cameraman until the 23rd.
Yeah,
There you go.
Well, buddy, man, I appreciate you coming on here with us tonight. I don't want to burn any more topics up since we were taking an hour and a half of your time. I want to get you back on at some point, and hopefully wrap up a story with Cesar. Sorry, all that. But I'll definitely pick your brain on a bunch of other topics next time around if we can get you back on.
For sure, man. I'd love that. I love talking. I love talking everything deer hunting, and this has been really fun. I appreciate you having me on.
I've learned a lot, especially with the late season talk and the long lining. Never really heard of much people talk about that. So that definitely opened up some eyes on the thermal cover and all that stuff. It's definitely something I'm going to take into account when chasing on some of these deer.
Definitely, that'd be cool, man. If you have success, let me know, because I love to help guys out and hear from other people who have similar experiences.
Absolutely, man. Tell everybody where they can find you and your channels on social media and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so just Public Land Whitetails on YouTube and on Facebook. There again, it's Public Land Whitetails. We have a page and a group. So the group, you can interact with other people within the community. The page is obviously a little bit for more following me. If you want to follow my professional account on Facebook, it's just my name, Cody Huhn. It'll be me and my giant 168. You can't miss it as the profile photo. And we do have a Public Land Whitetails TikTok where you get a little bit more of the behind the scenes thing. Maybe I'm just out walking around. I find a shed or something. I'll pick it up, make a quick TikTok about it or whatnot. And then there is a Cody Huhn Instagram if you want to follow me over there, which is just, some general photos, things like that.
I appreciate it, man. I appreciate you coming on with us for sure, man. And for anybody out there in podcast land, hit us with the rate and review. YouTube, like, subscribe, that whole 9 yards. But we'll be back again next week, episode 94. We're getting so much closer to that episode 100. We'll catch you guys next week.
Thanks, Cody.
Thank you.
There we go.
Appreciate it, dude. That was awesome.
Thanks for having me, guys. Like I said, I talk too much sometimes.